and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, this afternoon, tasting one of my favourite distilleries. It's been a while since, I think this is the first time we've actually done an episode of the show on this particular distillery, and well, it's kind of, well, sort of down to the fact that for quite a while the distillery in question kind of didn't really have a bit of a, well, didn't have any kind of sampling policy, or should I say, probably to be more accurate, they didn't send samples. I guess it was the fact that, you know, it's such a popular distillery, and they, you know, for a while felt the need that didn't need to do that kind of thing. But as the rep kindly paid me a visit earlier this week and dropped in some samples, that has all changed. Woo! That's good news. What distillery am I waffling on about? Well, Springbank. I mean, you know, along with Bruichladdich and a couple of other distilleries, I would certainly say that Springbank is probably up there with, you know, certainly one of my favourite distilleries. And like I was saying to the rep, with my really favourite distilleries, I'm probably harder when it comes to sort of like doing reviews, because I guess to a certain extent I expect more from them. I expect them, you know, to be consistently good all of the time, a bit like sort of Lafroy. Other sort of distilleries that, you know, I don't mind, but I wouldn't say they're in my sort of favourites. Don't tend to be quite so hard on them. Certainly ones that I don't particularly rate, I'm always kind of looking for, you know, a good bottling from them. And you know, sometimes more often than not, in the case, you know, you just you're disappointed. But anyway, enough about that. Let's talk for a little while about the distillery itself. So give you a bit of historical waffle. Apparently, the distillery itself was founded in 1828 on the site of an illicit still run by Archibald Mitchell. And interesting to note that the distillery is in, you know, the same family, within the Mitchell family, and you know, it's the oldest singly or family owned distillery in the whole of Scotland. I mean, it's been through some you know, closed periods or sort of limited production. It's had issues with investment, and certainly some of the warehousing sort of suffered a little bit, and certainly some of the bottlings over the years have suffered because of it. The other sort of really interesting sort of thing about Springbank is it's the only distillery that malts all its barley, all the barley that it uses on site. I mean, you know, there are a number of other distilleries that do a bit of on-site malting, but Springbank is kind of unique in the fact that it malts all its own barley, so it's all kind of quite self-contained. The other distinctive thing about Springbank is that the standard Springbank, which is peated to around about 12 to 15 parts per million, is distilled 2.5 times, which basically means they'll do a spirit run, and then part of that spirit run will be added to the feints, the foreshorts, and the first run, and then redistilled again. So it's kind of complex, and there is a formula, but it works out, like I said, about sort of 2.5 times distilled. Whereas the peated malt that they do long row is just purely distilled twice. So it's kind of quite interesting in that fact. And I've been kind of tasting Springbank now for a number of years, and the big issue, the big problem with Springbank is that as the age statements increase, you tend to find that they use a lot more sherry cask, and of course obviously using a lot more sherry cask means occasionally the S word crops up, and I have tasted a few bottlings of Springbank that have been blemished with the S word, shall we say. So it's always something to sort of bear in mind with older expressions of Springbank. But then, in saying that, you know, older expressions of Springbank can be exceptionally good. It's a style you have to sort of enjoy, because it's quite a heavily wooded style. Certainly, you don't tend to get very much of the kind of polished sherry character that some distilleries have. It tends to have a rawness and an intensity which, you know, again, like I said, you kind of really have to get into. I certainly enjoy it, and you know, as you know, I'm not the world's greatest lover of sherry casks, but I do enjoy Springbank. So anyway, I think that's probably enough of the waffling with regards to that. Shall we take a look at this afternoon's little lineup then? Right, okay, so why did the rep come and pay me a visit? Well, it would appear that this year, well, with sort of companies that like ourselves that buy directly from Springbank, every Christmas time they run some kind of deal, you know, buy X amount of cases, get this free, get that, or whatever, you know. This year they've decided against doing that, and what they've bottled is they've bottled this. This is going to be a UK only single cask bottling of 16-year-old Springbank Madeira. Now I failed to ask whether it's wholly spring Madeira aged or whether it's finished in Madeira, but I have tasted it, and my initial impression is that it is indeed probably all been aged in for its entire 16 years in Madeira. So that will be interesting. But obviously one spirit does not make a tasting, as they say. Something to do, one swallow does not make a summer or something. Anyway, so I had a rummage in the sample drawer and pulled out some 3 other rather interesting bottlings. The first is the classic Springbank 10. Now, Springbank 10 can be a little bit disjointed, and I guess over the years I don't know whether I've become more accustomed to the 10-year-old or whether it really got a lot better, but I do seem to enjoy 10-year-old Springbank a lot more. It does have a certain charm. This is a bottling from 2013, so relatively new. I thought we'd then take a look at a slightly older expression. I have an 18-year-old, a little dribble left, and 18-year-old from bottled in 2012, and along with this Madeira I thought it might be interesting to have a look at a previous Madeira aged malt they did. This is a 11-year-old. Now this was entirely aged in Madeira casks. It was bottled in June of it was distilled, sorry, in June of 1997, bottled January 2009 at 55.1. Conversely, the 16-year-old is bottled at 56. So, yeah, interesting. I thought that might make quite a good comparison between the two, so we can have a look at a younger and older version that's been aged in Madeira casks, and obviously look at two core expressions. So. Probably about time to crack on with the 10-year-old then, I think. Right, okay, so 10-year-old Springbank. Now, like I was saying earlier, it's the older expressions that tend to have more of the sherry cask character. So the 10-year-old has a tendency to be predominantly bourbon oaked, and a lot of people, myself included, tend to feel that Springbank really doesn't come into its own until it gets to about sort of mid-teens. It's always been one of those whiskies, and certainly I tasted the Springbank CV, which was a range they did a while ago, which was, you know, very young spirit, and it really was just so young. It was all over the place, really. But anyway, let's shut up and let's have a look at this one. It's pleasantly barley, a lot of sweet barley, bit of fruit, bit of dusty light peat, touch of sherry sitting in the background, not an awful lot, just a little bit. Again, it's got a real youthfulness to it, but there's a touch, a little flowery note. Again, a little bit of spiciness from the sherry. a little bit of herbalness. It's, yeah, it's nice. It's pleasant. This is you know, quite a good bottling, I think. So yeah, nice and coastal. Some nice spice on the finish there. So it kind of it's mellow, it's lazy, it comes in with sort of some fleshy fruit, and it's got this kind of raw character. Like I said, it's got some a little bit of tannin from the sherry cask, plenty of spices, a little bit of peat, just a little bit. Quite oily, certainly on the finish now, or the aftertaste is very oily, and I've often found that young Springbank can be really oily, but yeah, I think that's really pleasant. Finish is nice and fresh and crisp, quite salty, like I said, fairly big and rounded. Yeah, that's not bad bottling of 10-year-old at all. Right, okay, so on to the 18-year-old. As you can see, certainly from the colour, a lot more sherry casks used in this particular bottling. So let's see what those gives us. Really oily, subtle, nutty, dark, malty, treacle. A little bit of herbal note, a little bit of violet, which I often tend to find with Springbank. Not quite Parma violets, but a sort of sweet violet character. Really dusty peat. And although the sherry is not sort of blanketing, it's kind of there. It's not sort of really doing an awful lot, so to speak. It's kind of setting a background. I must admit, I think probably the sample I've got is starting to sort of suffer a little bit. It's certainly quite subtle, but you know, it's got some charm, got some sort of light coffee, chocolatey notes. Again, some earthy spice. Palate. Big, thick, juicy treacle, dark toffee, licorice. Then on the finish you start to get that sweet tannin, a little bit of violets, lovely sort of salt sugar balance on the finish. That's big and rich, and like I said, really juicy, lots of dried fruit, sort of raisins, sultanas, a little bit of chocolate, some coffee. Really complex, and it just has this kind of natural feel to it. It's certainly not a polished kind of malt. It's not raw. Raw is the kind of wrong word. Natural is, it just kind of perfectly sort of sums the Springbank up, in my opinion, and it's just got such a wonderful, certainly not in this particular bottling, overt sherry character. It's all kind of quite nicely, harmoniously put together. So so yeah, really nice. Right, okay, so let's have a look at the 11-year-old Madeira Expression, as it was called. It was bottled in with one of the, not the sort of standard Springbank labels, but as you probably know, that every year they tend to do a limited wood expression, and it gets bottled with a kind of simple kind of grey sort of browny label with all the information on, and this was what this particular one was. So Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Oh, that's a big nose. Huge chunks of biscuity Madeira, honey, really lots and lots of earthy tannins, bit of alcohol prickle as well. Oh yeah, that's again raw, natural, uncompromising, but lovely, warm. Like I said, it has a kind of fruity, biscuity, shortbready, violety. Yeah, that's a serious winter warmer, shall we say. There's a little bit of herbal spirit kind of coming through, sort of like I say, hinting at its youthfulness. But yeah, that's a nice nose. So palate then. Oh, it's got some tannin. Chuck in the alcohol as well. That's a really dry finish. Big, rich, again really natural, spiced fruit, biscuits, Madeira cake, dare I say it, a little bit of toffee, a little bit of peats, mirth, but not getting an awful lot on the finish. Like I said, it's that combination of the tannins and the alcohol, which is kind of really drying up quite a bit. So trusty drop of water I think is required. Right, let's see if this opens the nose up then, shall we? It's a lot oilier now, getting a lot more spirit character, a lot less of the Madeira, with that sort of oily apricot, fleshy fruit, bit of salt. Comes across as a bit more polished now. Sort of a little drop of water has obviously sort of taken away a little the rawness of the bottling. But the Madeira is obviously still there. It's still got all that sort of toasty, caramelly, Madeira, biscuity. Now getting a little bit more peat as well. Slight sweetness to the peat smoke. A little bit of violet. A little bit of sort of crystallized, sugared, dried fruit. Still, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think Springbank is one of these sort of malts that really does seem to work, seem to hold up to various wood finishes. I mean, I've tasted sort of claret finishes, Barolo finishes, all sorts of different finishes, and the spirit itself has got the robust character that to basically not get swamped completely by it. So, and this is exactly the same. All right, let's see what the palate does now. Wow, that's lush. Oh, it's so soft now. Again, like I say, it still retains that little bit of an edge, that little bit of rawness, but it's certainly a lot more polished now. More honey, juicy, dried fruits, a little bit of spice, a little bit of peat coming out now. I mean, that is fantastically good. And I certainly remember when we were stocking this back in when was that, 2009? Yeah, that's very, very good. Right, okay, so the 16-year-old Madeira. It's got something to live up to that particular one. So let's see how this one goes. A lot subtler. I mean, if I was tasting that blind, I would say that had quite a lot of, or it had some, should we say, maybe not quite a lot, but some refill sherry. It's got that refill sherry sweetness. Yeah, there's a bit of biscuitiness, some lovely dusty peat, some dusty spices, earth. It's a bit more mellow. It's obviously not quite as raw, but there is still that sort of rawness to it, that natural character. Some violets, juicy dried fruits, and it's just got that, just has that lovely mature note to it. It almost, it's kind of, it's one of those sort of malts that is, if you, again, I think if you were tasting this blind, it kind of doesn't really, you'd be hard pressed to put this down as Springbank. I mean, there's moments when you sort of like smell this and you think, that's an old Spey. I mean, something like Old Glen Grant, American oak Old Glen Grant, with that sort of almost sawdusty oaky kind of character. But then you think, well, no, it's not quite there. It's got something different, and it just goes to show how difficult it is to taste whiskey completely blind. But it's fantastic. I love this. This is amazingly good, and it's, like I said, it doesn't smell like a 16. It smells like it's about double its age. It really has that lovely maturity to it. Palate. Juicy dried fruits, a little bit of marzipan, Madeira cake, lots of Madeira. It's just Madeira cake city, you know. Lovely spices, a little bit of peat. More of that sort of rawness now. I mean, that again, part of that is down to the alcohol level, and you certainly taste that on the finish. It is very dry, mouth-watering. It's salty. I mean, it's one of the things I love about Springbank is the salty character. I mean, and it's one of those spirits that has fueled the whole debate about how sort of salt gets into whiskey. How does that sort of salty flavour, you know, appear in malts like Springbank, like some of the Islers, and of course it all comes down to the fact that they're coastal. The distillery is right smack bang at the coast. There's sea air everywhere, there's salt laden air, and as we know, as a malt matures in the cask, as it gets warmer and colder, it sort of contracts and expands within the cask, drawing air into the cask. And you know, as far as I can see, if the air surrounding a cask is going to be laden with salt, it just stands to reason that by dragging that salty air in to the malt, it's going to give it a salty kind of character. Other people completely and utterly disagree with that and say they've tasted salt in, you know, whiskies that have been, you know, matured and stored, you know, a million miles away from the coast. And you know, obviously I can't argue with that, but you know, my experience is that I've tasted whiskies like Colila and other Islers that have been, you know, that I know that have been matured on the mainland, and the salt character, yeah, there's a little bit there, but it's certainly nowhere near the character that you would expect from a whiskey matured on by the coast. And so it just seems to me that that is how the salt character kind of gets into the whiskey. But you know, you may well disagree with me, and there are a number of people that do and have done in the past. But anyway, that's by the by. But coming back to this particular bottling, it's really good, very good. Right, okay, so shall we sum this little tasting up then? Springbank 10-year-old. I think it's getting better. It's either getting better or I'm kind of getting more used to it and actually quite enjoying it. It certainly wasn't as kind of imbalanced as previous bottlings of 10-year-old. It wasn't quite as oily and youthful, and it certainly seemed to have a better integration. And all round pretty enjoyable. So, you know, a good bottling of the 10-year-old, shall we say. The 18, well, I think the sample probably wasn't showing at its best, to be honest with you, but I think it came, I hope it kind of got across the sort of what the 18 or what the older expressions of Springbank are like, with the more of the sherry character. And again, nice to see none of the S words, so that particular bottling was exceptionally good, so nice one. The two Madeira expressions, well, obviously the 11-year-old was younger, a lot rawer, a lot more intense, a lot more tannins, but like I was saying, you know, the malt has the character and the strength to stand up to sort of, you know, these sort of wine finishes, and Madeira is probably it's quite an uncompromising you know, finish, shall we say. I mean, I've tasted a number of Madeira finishes, and you know, they can be sort of quite heavy going, certainly if you're using a sort of a lighter style of whiskey, but certainly Springbank, yeah, certainly had the guts to stand up to it. And the 16-year-old, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a very good whiskey. Like I said, it just seemed to have a bit of everything. It was, you know, one minute I was certainly in Springbank. The next minute I was in Speyside, you know, and it had that sort of lovely sort of sawdusty old kind of character to it, and it certainly smells and to a certain degree tastes a lot older than what you would expect a 16-year-old taste. So I reckon I'll definitely be stocking that. So keep an eye out on the website for that. While we're talking about websites, obviously the range from Springbank that we do, the 10, the 15, the 18, are all currently in stock and obviously available if you're interested, along with the long row bottlings that they do. And as you may well know, Springbank have withdrawn the age statement bottlings of long row that they used to do, and it's now doing a no age statement. So we've still got some of the 14, which was a fabulous bottling, really very good, and some of the 18-year-old long row as well, which is definitely worth getting your hands on, I should say. Although the bottling that we have in stock of the 18-year-old long row was the very subtly peated bottling that they did a couple of years back, I guess it was now, I suppose. But even so, like I said, got those in stock, so yeah, if you fancy those. And also not forgetting the Hazelburn, the triple distilled malt that they do. Again, very good, and if you like things like Antarhes, then obviously worth having a look at. So well, I guess all that's left to say is I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show, and it might be wet and windy and howling a hell of a gale outside, but I've got Springbank. Good evening.